A very good morning to everybody. So today's lecture is in continuation with what we have already done for the Merchant of Venice. In the previous lecture, we discussed the Act 4, which comprises of the famous trial scene, which we have already discussed in length. In today's lecture, we will be discussing the Act 5 of Merchant of Venice, which happens to be one of the shortest acts of the play because it has only one scene. Now, when we were talking about the Merchant of Venice in the class, in the very early lectures, I told you that a play needs to be understood on various levels. Now, if we talk about the significance of the acts, Act 5 does not hold that much significance. And the only reason for that is because a lot of action has already taken place. The conflict has been resolved in Act 4. What was the conflict of the play? The conflict of the play was Antonio taking a loan from Shylock of 3,000 ducats for 3 months, and Antonio was unable to pay back that loan. He was a defaulter. Shylock now wanted to take his 1 pound of flesh. He went to the court. He pleaded that his justice should be served. Now everything that has happened, Portia in the disguise of Balthazar has already saved Antonio from the clutches of Shylock. So the conflict, the major conflict of the play has been resolved. So Act 5 now is just important for the conclusion of the play. A lot of characters will be getting their happy ending from the writer. The writer will be rewarding them for their goodness, for their loyalty which they have held all throughout the play. So this is the only reason that a lot of critics call The Merchant of Venice a fairy story. Now why is it called a fairy story? Because a lot of them most of them will be getting their happy ending. Antonio is also going to get a happy ending. Now this point we will be discussing at length in the later part of this video, because for understanding how all the characters receive their happy end, we need to first understand what is Act 5 about. Now the setting of the Act 5 is Belmont, and as we know that in the presence of the Portia, Portia declared Lancelot, Now further, to understand how the characters will be getting their happy ending, first we need to know what happens in Act 5. Now the Act 5 begins in Belmont. So the setting of Act 5 is Belmont, and as we all know that Portia has already gone to Venice, and Nerissa is accompanying her in the disguise of Balthazar and the clerk. Now the only two characters who are present on stage in Belmont is Lancelot and Jessica. Now if we talk about Lancelot and Jessica, their history in the play has not been that smooth, and the only reason is because both of them have not got as many chances as Portia and Bassanio, or even Nerissa and Gratiano, the other two couples in this play, to express their love to each other. Both of them have been on the run throughout from Act 2 to Act 3, and the reason we all know, because Jessica eloped with Lorenzo against her father's wishes, so they were on the run. They have never really got the quality time to spend with each other, to express their love to each other. So now is the time. The setting of the scene is Belmont, and it is night time, and both Lorenzo and Jessica are expressing their love to each other. So when Jessica and Lorenzo are expressing their love to each other, however, there is a irony in this situation, because Lorenzo and Jessica compare themselves to the other famous couples of Shylock, like Pyramus and Thisbe, Dido and Aeneas, and Troilus and Cresside. Now the irony is the couples he is talking about have never really gotten their happy ending, but in this case over here, Jessica and Lorenzo will be getting their happy ending. So here is a little irony that we need to remember, that Lorenzo is somehow indicating that he doesn't understand that Jessica and himself have gotten a happy ending. So when Jessica and Lorenzo are talking to each other, at that very moment, Portia and Nerissa, they appear on the stage, and they are in their normal attire. Now they have changed their disguise attire, and they have come into their normal attire, and they do not tell Lorenzo or Jessica anything that has happened in the earlier scene, what was the court scene. Now they have hidden that fact from Lorenzo and Jessica, because Portia is planning something. She wants to give a surprise to Jessica that now she is the owner of everything that her father owns, and Lorenzo will be the legal heir of Shylock after his death. So she doesn't tell anything to Jessica and Lorenzo. At that very moment, Lancelot also comes on stage and he announces that Bassanio and Gratiano along with Antonio will be coming the next morning. So Portia goes to her room and she is just waiting when Bassanio will come back, because she is going to have a playful fight with her father, with her husband, because as we all know, she has taken the ring from Bassanio, the wedding ring which she took with a promise that he will never part with. And Bassanio, on insistence of Antonio, has already given that ring to Balthazar, who is also Portia in her disguise. So just a moments later, there is an announcement that Bassanio, Gratiano and Antonio have come on stage, and Portia and Nerissa, both of them go to greet their respective husbands. And when they've just returned back to Belmont, they're telling about the bravery of the lawyer, who happens to be Portia herself, that how with her wisdom he saved Antonio from the clutches of Shylock. So while they're just talking, there is a little noise of Nerissa and Gratiano fighting, and the reason for their fight is that Nerissa asks Gratiano to produce the ring which Nerissa also gave to Gratiano when they were taking their wedding vows. But Gratiano over here announces that he has given that ring to the clerk of Balthazar, the lawyer, because in return of a favor that he saved their friend. So Nerissa is very angry. She's pretending to be very angry at Gratiano, that she will not spare him, and she's not even never going to see him again, because he has broken a promise, and she's even charging him of infidelity. And on the same time, Portia appears on the stage, and she has another plan in her mind. Now she compares Gratiano to Bassanio, and over here she says that her husband would have never done such a thing by giving a very dear present of Portia to someone else, whatsoever it may be. And that's the time when Gratiano and Bassanio both announce that even Bassanio has given his ring to the lawyer Balthazar as a token of love, as a token of gratitude for saving Antonio. So Portia is now completely feisty. She is very angry. She also pretends that Bassanio has cheated upon her, and that she will not be talking to him until and unless he produces the same ring. And she also says that now, like Bassanio has parted with the wedding ring, she will also be now open to cheat with anybody she wishes. So that's the time when Antonio comes in, and he says that he assures with his own soul that Portia and Nerissa should trust Gratiano and Bassanio, that they haven't cheated with their wives. It is just for his worthless self that they gave their both wives a dear gift to the lawyer. So Portia and Nerissa over here, they pretend that they are on the assurance of Antonio forgiving both Gratiano and Bassanio, and they again take up an oath from both their husbands that now they will be giving them both another set of rings which they will never be parting with ever again, whatsoever it may be. And both the husbands agree to it. Both the husband says that they will never repeat the mistake again. And when Bassanio and Gratiano receive their respective rings, they find something suspicious about that. And the reason for the suspicion is because they recognize the rings. They understand these are the same rings which their wives gave them in the earlier scene, in Act 3 scene 2. So now they are completely confused, because not even their worst nightmare can they understand what has happened, because they cannot expect Portia and Nerissa to be in Venice while they were giving those rings to both Balthazar and the clerk of Balthazar. So they are completely confused, and Portia even plays around with her husband, and she says that she went to the same lawyer and she gave him some assistance, and then he gave him back the ring. So Bassanio is confused. He still cannot figure out that her wife is fooling around with him, and he cannot understand it was Portia in the disguise of Balthazar. in Act 4, who saved Antonio from the clutches of Shylock. So it is now time, because Bassanio and Gratiano, both of them are going crazy understanding what has happened to them. So Portia tells Bassanio, and Nerissa tells Gratiano all the plan that they made successful. And along with Bassanio and Gratiano, Lorenzo and Jessica also learn that Portia did not go to any monastery. She went to Venice to save Antonio. And at that very moment, Portia announces to Nerissa how Shylock has made Lorenzo his legal heir. So over here, Portia tells Jessica what all happened with her father, how Shylock's intention of killing Antonio, and how his intention of then grabbing money, taking the opportunity of taking 10 times 3,000 ducats from Bassanio have been shattered, and how Venice treated him in the most strict way, taking away his entire property, half of which went to Venice and half went to Antonio, but how Antonio spared him and gave him a share of his own money. So Jessica gets to know that Lorenzo will be the legal heir of Shylock after Shylock's death, and Jessica and Lorenzo are really happy by the turn of events, how they have inherited their legal property. So Portia and Nerissa have made peace with their husbands. They have played around with them also. Jessica and Lorenzo are happy by the turn of the events, how they have inherited their legal property. It is only Antonio whose journey at this moment seems somehow incomplete, because he has lost his ships. He was a defaulter just few moments back, and he's left with no money. But that very moment, with the help of a servant, a letter is received in which it is mentioned that 3 of Antonio's ship, which were earlier missing, have been recovered, and Antonio also receives his happy ending. So this is the point I was talking about in the initiation of the lecture, when I told you that a lot of critiques call The Merchant of Venice a fairy story, because each of the characters, or major portion of the characters, received their happy ending. Antonio has received his money, his ships are back, and he can now continue to trade and lend money to people without any interest. The three couples have very different love stories of their own. One is Jessica and Lorenzo, the other is Gratiano and Nerissa, and the last is Bassanio and Portia. So the characters received their happy ending, and we started the play with we started the play The Merchant of Venice, calling it a tragic comedy. But along with tragic comedy, which is the main plot of the play, there are various subplots. The first subplot was Jessica eloping with Lorenzo. Second subplot was Bassanio going to Belmont to win Portia, and the third subplot was Portia and Nerissa taking their wedding rings from their respective husbands in the disguise of Balthazar and the clerk of Balthazar. So the entirety of the play is most complete when we hear how Antonio has been saved. Jessica and Lorenzo, who loved each other, but because of the religions, they could not be together. So thank you so much. I hope Act 5 is clear to you. If you have any questions, I will be happy to entertain them. You can send it to me on WhatsApp or even in the comment section. And in the other lecture, we will be discussing the major themes of the play, The Merchant of Venice. So it will be advised that till my other lecture, I would advise you that you go through all the acts, Act 1, 2, 3 and 4, and write down all the possible questions or queries you have, because in the next lecture, which will be the theme of the play, a lot of other points which you might not be understanding at the moment will be cleared. Thank you so much.